saved by the ruthless Alpha King. The high realms stretched beneath her window, a canvas of marble spires and cobblestone streets that had once captivated Auren. Now, they only reminded her of what she could never have. Freedom. She traced her fingers along the cold iron bars, wondering if by the end of it all she'd ever breathe free air again, or if death would claim her first. The dungeons of the Obsidian Court smelled of desperation and decay, air so thick with suffering it clogged her lungs with each breath. Auren Vale sat with her back against the damp stone wall, her healer's hands dirty and chained before her. 3 weeks had passed since the guards had dragged her from her small apothecary shop, the accusations of treason hanging in the air like poison. Omega, the guard sneered, sliding a tray of moldy bread beneath her cell door. His Majesty has scheduled your execution, tomorrow at dawn. He lingered, eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. They say the children of traitors bleed just like their parents. As if pulled by invisible strings, Auren's fingers touched the hollow of her throat where her mother's pendant once rested before the guards had ripped it away. The memory of her parents' execution rose unbidden, her mother's final words, her father's steadfast gaze as the axe fell. What followed was years of solitude, of hiding her lineage, of pretending to be nothing more than a simple healer with steady hands and quiet dreams. I have committed no crime, she whispered, her wolf stirring restlessly beneath her skin, sensing danger. I've helped the people of this realm, nothing more. The guard laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off stone walls. Feeding rebel soldiers? Brewing potions to heal enemies of the crown? That's treason, love. With a single glance at her chains, he turned and left her alone with the crushing weight of inevitability. That night, Auren couldn't sleep. Her wolf paced anxiously within her, sensing the approaching end. In the span of a breath, her life had crumbled, from respected healer to condemned prisoner. She didn't fear death itself, but the thought of dying for a crime she didn't commit burned like acid in her chest. Deep down, she knew the truth. It wasn't about aiding rebels. It was about her bloodline, the secret she'd kept buried since she was 12, the last veil, the last of the Moonborn. As the first light of dawn spilled through the tiny window of her cell, the door scraped open. "Time to meet your king," a gruff voice announced. And just like that, rough hands seized her arms, dragging her from the damp sanctuary of her cell. The guards marched her through corridors that grew increasingly ornate, marble replacing stone, velvet drapes hanging from arched windows that overlooked sprawling gardens. The palace's beauty felt like a mockery to someone walking to her death. More importantly, Auren realized, the opulence served to emphasize the power of the man who ruled here, the Alpha King who had signed her death warrant without ever meeting her. The moment their eyes locked on the execution platform, something inside her shifted. Auren had expected a monster, a tyrant with cruelty etched into every line of his face. Instead, King Thorne Veyrac was devastatingly beautiful, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like carved granite, and eyes the color of a winter storm. His presence commanded the room, an aura of absolute power that made even the strongest alphas lower their gazes. Without thinking, Auren lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. Her wolf surged forward, inexplicably drawn to the danger before her. The crowd's murmurs faded, the world narrowed to a tunnel of silver gray, the color of the Alpha King's eyes as they widened fractionally upon meeting hers. With every heartbeat that passed between them, tension thickened in the air. Her scent betrayed her, the sweet, honeyed aroma of an Omega in distress. Yet something else mingled with it. Defiance, strength, a refusal to beg. "Proceed," the king commanded, his voice deep as thunder across distant mountains. The executioner stepped forward, axe gleaming in the morning light. As the blade rose, Auren's wolf howled silently within her, not in fear, but in fury at the injustice. She closed her eyes, resigned to join her parents in whatever came after. The air thickened with anticipation. Before the blade could fall, a roar shattered the silence. "Stop!" The word echoed across the courtyard like a physical force. Auren's eyes flew open to find King Thorne standing, his massive frame rigid with tension, eyes ablaze with something primal and fierce. The crowd gasped as one, nobles clutching at pearls and silks as the unmovable king moved. Without warning, he descended the dais in long, predatory strides. The executioner backed away, confusion etched on his weathered face. The king's personal guards shifted nervously, hands on sword hilts, unsure whether to protect their ruler from the chained Omega or protect the prisoner from their king. As the silence stretched between them, Auren could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. The Alpha King towered over her, his scent wrapping around her like smoldering embers and winter pine, intoxicating, dangerous, forbidden. "Your Majesty," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Beneath the moonlight of early morning, King Thorne's eyes darkened to near black as his pupils expanded. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her throat. Not squeezing, but holding, claiming. His touch burned like fire against her skin, her wolf preening beneath his attention rather than cowering. Truth be told, Auren didn't know what scared her more, the execution she'd expected, or this inexplicable connection that crackled between them like lightning before a storm. "What are you?" he growled, voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "What magic is this?" Before she could answer, the king's grip shifted from her throat to her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze fully. The tension broke as he lowered his head toward her, his breath warm against her skin. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the ruthless Alpha King, the man who had executed hundreds without blinking, pressed his lips to the condemned Omega's forehead in the ancient gesture of claiming. A mark, a protection, a declaration that left noblemen gasping and counselors paling. While her pulse raced beneath his touch, the king's voice rumbled against her skin. "Mine," he declared loud enough for all to hear. "By royal decree, this woman's life is now mine to determine." As fire bloomed beneath her skin where his lips had touched, Auren trembled. The king's hand moved to her shackles, removing them with a key from his own pocket, as if he'd planned this moment all along. Her chest ached with confusion. Why would the most powerful alpha in the realm claim a condemned prisoner? Why spare the daughter of traitors? Without another word, King Thorne turned to the stunned courtiers. "The execution is cancelled. Any who question my decision question the crown itself." His gaze swept over the assembly, challenging anyone to object. Nobody dared. In the stillness that followed, he turned back to Auren, something ancient and knowing flickering behind his eyes. "Come," he commanded, extending a hand that had both sentenced her to death and granted her life in the span of minutes. Her world tilted as she placed her hand in his. Something primal and unstoppable had been set in motion. As though fate whispered between them, binding their souls together with invisible threads, Auren knew her life would never be the same. She had been saved, but as the Alpha King led her from the execution platform toward his palace, her bones remembered an old warning her mother had once shared. Sometimes the cage with golden bars proves more dangerous than the executioner's blade. The marble floor was cold against Auren's knees as she knelt in the center of King Thorne's private chambers, her scent spiking with fear and something else, something that made her wolf whine with confusion. The Alpha King circled her like a predator, his silver gaze trailing fire across her skin. He hadn't spoken a word since commanding the guards to leave them alone, and the silence pressed against her ears until she thought they might bleed. "Did you bewitch me?" he finally growled, voice cutting through the air like a blade. "What ancient magic did you use to make me spare your life?" Before she could move, he was before her, crouching down to her level, one powerful hand gripping her jaw. Their faces inches apart, his breath fanned across her cheeks, scented with cloves and something untamed. Auren's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she wondered if he could hear it. "I used no magic, Your Majesty," she whispered, her wolf rising to the surface unafraid despite the danger. "I am merely a healer." As the silence stretched between them, Thorne's thumb traced the curve of her bottom lip, the gesture strangely tender from a man renowned for his cruelty. Then, just as quickly, he released her and stood, putting distance between them as if burned. "You'll stay here," he commanded, striding toward the heavy oak doors. "In the east wing, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. You're alive. Be grateful." More importantly, she realized as the doors slammed shut behind him, she was now his prisoner in a different kind of cage. One gilded with luxury instead of iron bars. Rather than relief, a strange emptiness bloomed in her chest, as if something vital had been yanked away with his departure. That night, alone in chambers larger than the entire cottage where she'd grown up, Auren paced like the caged wolf she was. Silks and velvets draped the massive four-poster bed, exotic rugs softened the marble floors, and a balcony offered views of the glittering capital below. Yet freedom remained as distant as the stars above. As fire bloomed in the hearth, tended by silent servants who refused to meet her eyes, Auren tested her new boundaries. The doors were unlocked, but 2 guards stood stationed outside, their expressions impassive. "His Majesty's orders," they repeated when she questioned them. "You may move about this wing, but no further." With every heartbeat that passed in this gilded prison, Auren's confusion grew. Why had King Thorne claimed her? What did he want? The mark he'd placed on her forehead, the royal claim, burned like a brand whenever she thought of it. After that came 3 days of solitude, broken only by servants bringing meals and fresh clothing, delicate gowns of silk and lace rather than the simple linens she was accustomed to. Her healer's hands, once strong and certain, now felt useless, idle. On the 4th night, as she stood watching the sunset paint the capital in hues of amber and gold, a sharp knock at her door broke the silence. Without waiting for a response, the door swung open to reveal a tall woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. "The king requests your presence at tonight's feast," she announced, her gaze sweeping critically over Auren's simple appearance. "I am Lady Eris, mistress of the royal household. I've been instructed to prepare you." As the wind shifted through the open balcony doors, bringing with it the scent of approaching rain, Auren felt her first real fear since the execution platform. "I would rather decline," she said quietly. Lady Eris laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Nobody declines the king's invitation, especially not his pet." Before she could process the insult, servants flooded the room carrying trays of cosmetics, jewels, and a gown the color of midnight. Under Lady Eris's critical eye, they transformed Auren from prisoner to something resembling nobility. Her copper hair twisted into elaborate braids interwoven with silver threads, her eyes rimmed with kohl, her lips stained with berry juice. "The king has peculiar tastes," Lady Eris remarked, studying the final result with narrowed eyes. "Though I suppose even a common Omega can look presentable with enough effort." The moment their eyes locked in the mirror, Auren saw the contempt beneath the woman's polite facade. Her wolf stirred, sensing a rival. "I never asked for his attention," Auren replied softly. With a single glance that spoke volumes about what she thought of that statement, Lady Eris gestured toward the door. "Come. Don't keep His Majesty waiting. He dislikes that most ardently." The great hall of the Obsidian Court blazed with 1,000 candles, the light reflecting off jewels and polished armor. Nobles dressed in silks and velvets clustered in tight groups, their laughter falling silent as Auren entered. Beneath the weight of their stares, her steps faltered. As the silence roared around her, whispers followed in her wake like slithering snakes. "Traitor's daughter," they hissed. "King's whim," others murmured. "Won't last a week," predicted many. Without thinking, Auren lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. Her wolf pressed forward, sensing the hostility in the room. All these alphas and betas affronted by an Omega who dared rise above her station. At the head table, elevated on a dais of black marble, sat King Thorne. Even seated, his presence dominated the hall, his silver crown gleaming against raven hair. His expression remained impassive as Lady Eris led Auren toward him, but his eyes, those winter storm eyes, tracked her every movement with predatory intensity. "Your Majesty," Lady Eris curtsied deeply. "May I present Auren Vale, as requested?" Between one breath and the next, the hall fell completely silent. Time stood still as the Alpha King's gaze swept over Auren, taking in the transformation. Something dark and possessive flashed across his features before he gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, a position of highest honor. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The chair beside the king was traditionally reserved for his queen or closest advisor. Never had an accused traitor sat in such a place of distinction. As she took her seat, the scent of him washed over her. Winter pine and smoke, power and control. Her body moved on instinct, her wolf responding to his proximity with a shiver of awareness that traveled down her spine. "Eat," he commanded, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "You're too thin." The feast proceeded in a blur of rich foods and finer wines, courses upon courses served by silent attendants. Throughout it all, Auren felt the weight of the court's judgment, the sharp daggers of their stares. Yet King Thorne never addressed her beyond that single command, never explained to his bewildered courtiers why this Omega sat at his right hand. Her chest ached with confusion, and something dangerously close to longing. When a nobleman approached to whisper in the king's ear, Thorne's hand suddenly dropped to rest on Auren's wrist, his thumb tracing absent circles against her pulse point. The proprietary gesture silenced the room once more. Without warning, Auren found her voice. "Why am I here, Your Majesty?" she asked, the words escaping before wisdom could silence them. The king turned to her slowly, one dark eyebrow arched in surprise. No one questioned the Alpha King. Everyone knew this. Yet something in her eyes must have intrigued him, for instead of anger, amusement flickered across his features. "You've got fire," he murmured, his voice sending shivers down her spine. "Maybe you'll survive this." Before she could demand a real answer, he raised his goblet, addressing the stunned gathering. "To new beginnings," he proclaimed, his gaze never leaving Auren's face. The nobles echoed his toast with forced enthusiasm, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Among them, Auren noticed a man with eyes the same silver gray as the king's, watching her with calculated interest. As their glasses clinked in reluctant toast, the stranger smiled, a cold, knowing smile that made her blood run cold. "That," Thorne whispered in her ear, following her gaze, "is my brother, and he's already plotting how to use you against me." Her breath caught as the king's lips brushed the shell of her ear. "Trust no one in this court," he warned, his breath warm against her skin. "Especially not me." With that cryptic caution hanging between them, their bond crackled beneath the surface, unwanted yet undeniable. Neither would acknowledge it. Both could feel it pulling them together like twin flames drawn to the same inexorable blaze. Blood trickled from King Thorne's slashed palm onto the ancient text displayed before him, his silver eyes fixated on the name that had haunted his dreams for 7 nights. Moonborn. The candlelight caught the crimson droplets as they seeped into the yellowed pages, and for a heartbeat, they glowed with unnatural light before fading into the parchment. A forbidden blood ritual, performed by a king who claimed to believe in nothing but power. "Tell me why I can't stop thinking about her," he growled to the empty royal library, his voice echoing among towering shelves of forgotten knowledge. His wolf paced beneath his skin, agitated and hungry for something Thorne refused to name. With a snarl, he slammed the book shut, the ancient binding cracking in protest. 7 days had passed since the feast. 7 nights since he'd placed the Omega healer at his right hand like a queen, and 7 restless dawns spent fighting the inexplicable urge to seek her out. Her voice haunted him still. "Why am I here, Your Majesty?" A question he couldn't answer because he didn't understand it himself. His physician had suggested enchantment, his advisors whispered of manipulation, Yet deep down, Thorne knew the truth. Something ancient and primal had awakened when their eyes first met on the execution platform, something that defied his carefully crafted control. With a curse, King Thorne bound his bleeding hand with a strip of silk, his decision made before he consciously formed it. He would visit the East Wing, simply to check on his prisoner. Guest? He couldn't even name what she was to him, and that infuriated him most of all. Meanwhile, in her gilded cage, Auren Vale sat cross-legged on the balcony floor, basking in early morning sunlight as she crushed herbs between mortar and pestle. The guards had finally relented to her request for medicinal plants, perhaps tired of her relentless questions. Without thinking, she worked the mixture with practiced ease, the familiar scent of rosemary and valerian root bringing a momentary peace to her troubled mind. After that, her days had fallen into an uncertain rhythm of solitude broken only by servants who watched her with wary eyes. They brought her anything she requested, except answers or freedom. The palace library remained off-limits, yet books appeared mysteriously each morning while she slept. Ancient texts on healing arts, volumes of philosophy, and histories of the realm. Someone was watching her interests, studying her habits. As the wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of approaching rain, Auren stilled. Another scent cut through the morning air. Winter pine and smoke, power and barely leashed violence. Her heart leapt traitorously in her chest. Without warning, a sharp knock echoed through her chambers, followed immediately by the opening of doors. King Thorne filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the corridor, his presence sucking all the air from the room. For several heartbeats, they simply stared at each other. Auren noticed the silk wrapped around his left hand, the slight shadows beneath his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. To make things worse, her wolf surged forward, eager and yearning despite her human half's wariness. "You're injured," she said finally, breaking the charged silence, nodding toward his bandaged hand. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly, as if her concern surprised him. "A small price for knowledge," he replied enigmatically. Auren rose from her position on the balcony floor, the simple midnight blue gown she'd chosen clinging to her curves as she moved. "I could examine it if you'd allow me. I am a healer after all." Something like amusement flickered across his features. "So, I've been informed. Your reputation in the lower city was quite remarkable." In that moment, Auren realized he'd been investigating her, learning about her life before imprisonment. The thought sent an unexpected thrill down her spine. The mighty Alpha King, curious enough about a simple Omega to seek information. "Then you know I can help," she pressed, gathering her courage. "Unless the mighty king fears the touch of a prisoner?" His eyes flashed dangerously at the challenge, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "I fear nothing," he stated, the words hanging heavy between them. His gaze dropped to her hands, still stained green from the herbs. "Especially not a little healer who talks too much." Without another word, he crossed the room in measured strides and extended his injured hand. The space between them burned with unspoken tension as Auren carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandage, revealing a deep slash across his palm. Self-inflicted, she realized with a start. "A blood ritual?" she whispered, recognition dawning as she noted the distinctive pattern. Her fingers traced the air just above the wound, not quite touching his skin. "These are forbidden magics, Your Majesty." Thorne's eyes never left her face. "Knowledge is never forbidden to a king." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "What answers were you seeking that required your royal blood?" As the silence stretched between them, Auren feared she'd overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, he answered, "You." The single word sent shockwaves through her system, her wolf preening beneath the intensity of his gaze. Even so, Auren forced herself to focus on the wound, gathering her supplies with trembling hands. "You read Trevanian's moral philosophy," he remarked suddenly, nodding toward the open book on her bedside table. Your thoughts? Auren blinked, caught off guard by the shift in conversation. As she cleansed his wound with herb-infused water, she found herself engaging in a debate about the ancient philosopher's views on duty versus desire, surprised by the king's knowledge and insight. The tension between them transformed into something different, no less intense but somehow more intimate than physical awareness. Their minds connected over ideas while their bodies remained achingly conscious of each proximity, each accidental brush of fingers. As she wrapped fresh bandages around his hand, Auren realized with startling clarity that this visit had nothing to do with his injury. He could have summoned the royal physician. He had come to see her, to speak with her, drawn by the same inexplicable force that made her pulse quicken whenever he was near. Why did you become a healer? He asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Auren paused, considering her answer carefully. When my parents were executed for treason, I lost everything. Home, family, security. But I still had my hands in the knowledge my mother had passed down. Healing gave me purpose when the world offered none. His eyes darkened at the mention of her parents, something like regret flashing briefly across his features. And now? What purpose does the world offer you now, Auren Vale? It was the first time he'd spoken her name, the sound of it on his lips intimate and powerful. Her breath caught in her throat. Survival, she answered honestly, and perhaps understanding why the Alpha King spared a traitor's daughter from execution only to keep her caged in silk and velvet. Thorne stood abruptly, breaking the spell between them. He flexed his bandaged hand, nodding in approval at her work. You've skill, he acknowledged. Tomorrow, bring your healing supplies to my private study. There are matters I wish to discuss. Before she could respond, he turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. The books, he said without turning. Are they to your satisfaction? Her world tilted with the realization. They're from you. Knowledge should never be denied even to prisoners. With those parting words, he was gone, leaving Auren breathless and confused. That night, a violent thunderstorm lashed against the palace walls, lightning illuminating her chambers in harsh bursts. Each crash of thunder sent Auren's wolf into panic, a primal fear she couldn't control despite her human half's rational mind. She paced frantically, sweat beading on her brow as she fought the urge to shift. A dangerous proposition for an Omega without an Alpha's stabilizing presence. As if summoned by her distress, the doors burst open. King Thorne stood silhouetted against a flash of lightning, his expression unreadable in the darkness that followed. Your fear scent is flooding the entire wing, he stated, closing the door behind him. The guards thought you were being attacked. Auren curled her fingernails into her palms, fighting another wave of panic as thunder shook the very foundations of the palace. My wolf, she gasped, struggling to maintain control. She fears storms, has since childhood. Without hesitation, Thorne crossed to her, powerful hands gripping her shoulders. Breathe, he commanded, his voice dropping to the deep alpha register that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. Focus on my scent. Nothing will harm you here. Her wolf responded instantly to the alpha command, settling beneath her skin though her heart continued to race. Gradually, her breathing steadied as she inhaled his scent. Winter pine, smoke, and beneath it all, something uniquely Thorne. The moment their eyes locked, lightning illuminated the room once more, casting harsh shadows across the planes of his face. In that split second of clarity, Auren saw something naked and vulnerable in the Alpha King's expression. Longing, confusion, and a hunger that mirrored her own. Thank you, she whispered when the room plunged into darkness once more. He brushed off her gratitude with a curt nod, yet didn't release her shoulders. An Alpha's duty, he said gruffly, though they both knew it was far more than duty that had brought the king himself to comfort a distressed Omega. As the storm raged through the night, King Thorne remained, seated in a chair by her bedside while Auren drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she woke, he was there, silent and watchful, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. When Auren woke fully, he was gone. Only the lingering scent of winter pine and the faint impression on the chair by her bed suggested he had been there at all. Yet on her bedside table lay a small silver charm, an ancient wolf symbol meant to ward off nightmares. Her fingers closed around it, the metal warm against her palm as if imbued with something of the king himself. In the echo of his absence, Auren finally admitted the truth she'd been denying. Whatever bond pulled between them, whatever fate had intertwined their paths, she was falling hopelessly, recklessly, dangerously under the spell of the very man who held her captive. "She carries the blood that will drown your kingdom in flame, your majesty," the ancient priestess rasped, her blind eyes rolling back to reveal milky whites as she clutched King Thorne's wrist with surprising strength. "The last Moonborn lives, and while she breathes, your crown sits upon a crumbling throne." The Alpha King yanked his arm from her grasp, fury etched into every line of his face. He had visited the Temple of Seers in secret, disguised as a common nobleman. Yet somehow this withered crone had recognized him instantly, had spoken the very fear that haunted his sleepless nights. "You speak treason," he growled, low and dangerous. "Choose your next words with care." The priestess laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off ancient stone walls adorned with celestial symbols. "Kings come and go, but the stars remain. The prophecy cannot be undone by royal decree." Without warning, she seized his hand again, pressing her withered fingers against his healing palm, the one Auren had tended with such gentle care. "Her blood calls to yours. The bond you fight is written in the heavens themselves." As if pulled by invisible strings, Thorne leaned closer despite himself. "What bond?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The priestess smiled, revealing teeth blackened with age. "The one you denied yourself when you executed her parents? The one you feel building with every heartbeat when she's near?" She released his hand with a dismissive flick. "The bond that will either save your soul or consume your kingdom." Back in the palace, Auren paced the perimeter of the royal library, trailing her fingers along leather-bound spines. 2 weeks had passed since the thunderstorm night, and something had shifted between her and the king. Though still her captor, he had granted her access to new parts of the palace, including this vast repository of knowledge. With every step she took among towering shelves, Auren sensed she was being watched, not just by the stern librarian who tracked her movements with suspicious eyes, but by something older, something woven into the very stones of this ancient place. The feeling had grown stronger each day, a persistent whisper at the edges of her consciousness. That night, as she selected a tome on ancient healing practices, her fingers brushed against a hidden lever. The bookshelf before her shifted silently, revealing a narrow passage lined with torches that flickered to life at her presence. Her heart skipped a beat as the scent of old magic tickled her nose. The space between them burned with secrets, hers, his, and one's, neither yet understood. With a quick glance to ensure no one observed her, Auren slipped into the passage, her wolf surging forward in curiosity despite her human half's caution. The hidden corridor led downward in a spiral, opening finally into a circular chamber adorned with constellations painted in silver against midnight blue walls. In the center stood a stone pedestal holding a single book, its binding crafted from what appeared to be pearlescent dragon scale. As the silence roared around her, Auren approached the pedestal, drawn by an invisible force. The moment her fingers touched the book's cover, the constellations on the walls began to glow, illuminating the chamber in ethereal light. The book fell open of its own accord, pages turning by unseen hands until they stopped on an illuminated family tree. At the top of the ancient lineage chart gleamed 2 names in silver script, Evren and Lyra Moonborn, her parents. Her breath caught as her eyes traveled down the branches to find her own name, the only one still glowing with inner light. Beneath it, words shimmered into existence as if written by an invisible hand. The last daughter shall either break the throne or save the king's soul. Meanwhile, King Thorne stormed through the palace corridors, servants scattering before his fury like leaves in a gale. The priestess's warnings had confirmed his worst fears. The woman he couldn't stop thinking about, the Omega whose scent haunted his dreams, was the very threat his ancestors had warned of. As the wind shifted through an open window, carrying with it Auren's distinctive honey-sweet scent, tinged now with something else. Fear. Thorne froze. His wolf surged forward, protective instincts overwhelming reason as he tracked the scent to the royal library, now empty save for the startled librarian. "Where is she?" he demanded, not bothering to specify whom he meant. The librarian paled. "She was researching healing texts, Your Majesty." I stepped away only for a moment. Thorne didn't wait for him to finish. His wolf already knew, could sense her presence below in the sacred chamber that held his family's greatest secret, and apparently, hers as well. The moment their eyes locked across the prophetic chamber, something inside Thorne shattered. Auren stood in a pool of silver light, the Moonborn lineage book open before her, her copper hair gleaming like fire against the celestial backdrop. She looked like a goddess from ancient legends, beautiful and terrible in her newfound knowledge. "You knew," she whispered, her voice echoing in the sacred space. "You knew who I was all along." Thorne approached slowly, every step measured as he fought the warring instincts within, to protect her or to protect his kingdom from her. "I suspected," he admitted, his voice rougher than intended. "I didn't know for certain until I saw you touch that book. Only a true Moonborn could activate its magic." Her chest ached with betrayal. "Is that why you spared me? To keep your enemy close?" The Alpha King's expression hardened, though something vulnerable flickered behind his eyes. "The enemy I know is preferable to the one I don't." From there, the air between them crackled with tension, anger, hurt, and beneath it all, the undeniable pull that had drawn them together from the beginning. Auren's fingers clenched around the edge of the pedestal, her knuckles white. "My parents," she began, her voice trembling. "Did they truly commit treason, or were they executed simply for their bloodline?" Thorne's silence was answer enough. A single tear traced down Auren's cheek, dropping onto the ancient page where it sizzled and evaporated in a tiny wisp of silver smoke. "Your father led the rebellion that killed my mate," Thorne finally said, the words torn from him like a physical wound. "Your mother healed the rebels who slaughtered half my pack. So yes, they committed treason by the laws of this realm." His eyes locked with hers, fierce and unyielding. "But yes, they died primarily because they were Moonborn, because prophecy claimed their line would bring down the throne." Despite that painful truth, something in Auren refused to break. She had lived too long with loss to be crippled by it now. "And me?" she asked, lifting her chin. "Will you execute me too now that you know for certain?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Thorne's jaw tightened, conflict evident in every line of his powerful frame. In that moment, they both knew he should. Any rational king would eliminate the threat before him. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that their breaths mingled in the cool air of the sacred chamber. "I cannot," he admitted, the words seemingly pulled from the deepest part of him. Without thinking, Auren reached up, her palm resting against his cheek. The contact sent shockwaves through them both, their wolves surging forward in recognition. "Why?" Before either could speak further, footsteps echoed in the passage above, breaking the spell between them. In one fluid motion, Thorne pulled Auren behind him, shielding her with his body as his brother Darian appeared at the chamber entrance, flanked by royal guards. "Brother," Darian called, false concern dripping from his voice. "The council convenes in emergency session. It seems our guest has been identified." His gaze slid to Auren, malice glittering in eyes so similar, yet so different from Thorne's. "The last Moonborn in our very halls. How providential." Thorne's posture shifted subtly, his body language transforming from that of conflicted man to undisputed alpha. "Return to the council chamber," he commanded, power resonating in every syllable. I will join shortly. Once Darien retreated, Thorne turned back to Auren, his expression grim. The council will demand your imprisonment, or worse. Her world tilted with fear, yet her voice remained steady. And what will you demand, Your Majesty? His hand lifted to brush a copper strand from her face, the gesture tender despite the danger surrounding them. Stay in your chambers, he ordered softly. For your safety, not your containment. I will handle the council. As he turned to leave, Auren caught his wrist, her fingers encircling the spot where earlier the priestess had delivered her warning. Thorne, she said, using his name for the first time. Whatever happens, whatever they say about me or my family, trust your wolf, not their fear. Something like wonder flickered across the Alpha King's features at the sound of his name on her lips. Without another word, he lifted her hand to his mouth, pressing his lips against her inner wrist where her pulse raced beneath delicate skin. The gesture was ancient, intimate, a promise between wolves. That night, locked in her chambers as commanded, Auren paced restlessly, the knowledge of her lineage and the prophecy weighing heavily upon her. Outside her door, the guard contingent had doubled. Protection or prison, she couldn't be sure. While her pulse raced with anxiety, a sudden commotion erupted in the corridor, shouting, the clash of steel, a pained howl. Before she could react, her balcony doors burst open, and 3 masked figures slipped inside, daggers drawn. Moonborn, one hissed, advancing slowly. Your existence threatens everything. Her bones remembered ancient training then, knowledge her mother had insisted upon despite her healing nature. Auren's wolf surged forward, lending her strength as she evaded the first attacker's lunge, using his momentum to send him crashing into a table. But she was 1 against 3, an omega against trained killers. A blade sliced across her arm, drawing blood that gleamed silver in the moonlight, undeniable proof of her heritage. The assassins moved in for the kill. As though fate whispered between worlds, a bone-chilling roar shook the very foundations of the palace. The doors to her chamber splintered inward as King Thorne burst through, not in human form but as a massive black wolf with silver-tipped fur, eyes blazing with murderous rage. What followed was chaos and blood, primal violence unleashed with deadly precision. The Alpha King moved like living shadow, massive jaws crushing throats, powerful claws tearing through flesh. Not a single assassin survived his fury. Auren slid to the floor, clutching her bleeding arm, watching in awe and terror as Thorne shifted back to human form, his naked body splattered with blood, his eyes still glowing with lupine rage. He moved to her immediately, gathering her against his chest with a gentleness that belied the carnage he'd just delivered. Mine, he growled against her hair, the word more wolf than human. They will never touch what's mine. As fire bloomed beneath her skin where he held her, Auren realized the truth that had been building since the execution platform. This fierce, broken Alpha King cared for her in ways neither of them could explain or resist. And it terrified them both. When she woke hours later, bandaged and tended by the royal physician, Thorne sat beside her bed, fully dressed once more, his expression unreadable. "Why did you save me?" she whispered, voice rough from sleep. He studied her for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," he admitted, the rawness of his honesty more powerful than any declaration. "But my wolf does. That's enough, for now." Silver chains rattled against ancient marble as the royal seer collapsed to her knees, her body convulsing violently before King Thorne and his assembled council. Blood leaked from her eyes, crimson tears trailing down porcelain cheeks as she lifted her face toward the vaulted ceiling, mouth open in a silent scream. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't her own. It resonated with the echoes of 1,000 forgotten souls. "The Moonborn shall awaken the king's bond, or be his undoing," she intoned, the prophecy hanging in the air like poisoned mist. "When silver meets gold, when enemy becomes lover, when the broken crown is mended by moonlight, only then will the realm know peace. Her head snapped toward Thorne with unnatural speed, eyes now glowing silver. She carries your salvation and your destruction in her veins, Alpha King. Choose wisely. With a final shuddering gasp, the seer collapsed completely, the chains binding her wrists to the floor, the only thing keeping her from crumpling entirely. Silence descended upon the circular chamber as counselors exchanged nervous glances, none daring to speak first after such a display. High Elder Mathen finally cleared his throat, his ancient voice steady despite the tension. The prophecy is clear, Your Majesty. The Moonborn girl must be eliminated before she fulfills her destiny. Thorne's face revealed nothing, carved from granite and just as unyielding. Only the slight tightening of his fingers on the throne's armrests betrayed his inner turmoil. Leave me, he commanded, not looking at any of them. All of you. After they departed, Thorne sat alone in the council chamber, the prophecy echoing in his mind. 3 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt on Auren, 3 weeks of increased security, of healing wounds both visible and hidden. 3 weeks of fighting the growing pull between them, a pull that the prophecy had just confirmed was either salvation or damnation. Her scent lingered on his skin despite his efforts to distance himself. His wolf paced restlessly beneath the surface, angry at the separation he'd enforced since that bloody night in her chambers. Before she could move forward with her life, or he with his, the prophecy demanded resolution. But what resolution could there be when every path seemed to lead to destruction? Meanwhile, Auren stood on her balcony, watching snow blanket the capital in pristine white. The winter solstice approached, bringing the longest night of the year, a night sacred to her ancestral line, though she'd only learned this recently through the ancient texts she'd smuggled from the library. She hadn't seen Thorne in 23 days, not since he'd slaughtered her would-be assassins and held her with surprising tenderness as her blood stained his skin. He'd disappeared by morning, leaving only increased guards and a terrible silence that echoed through the East Wing. The guards no longer let her wander, even within her permitted areas. Food arrived at strict intervals, books no longer appeared mysteriously on her nightstand, and the palace had grown cold without the Alpha King's fiery presence. As the wind shifted, bringing with it the first hints of twilight, Auren clutched the silver charm he'd once left to ward off her nightmares. It had become something of a talisman, a physical reminder that beneath the ruthless exterior, something in Thorne recognized something in her, an inexplicable connection that transcended their circumstances. That night, as palace servants prepared for the solstice celebration, a sharp knock at her door broke the oppressive silence. Auren's heart leapt traitorously in her chest, hoping against hope, but it was only Lady Eris, her sharp features pinched with obvious displeasure. "The king requires your presence in the West Wing," she announced, distaste evident in every syllable. Auren's breath caught. The West Wing housed the royal apartments, Thorne's private domain that none entered without explicit invitation. "Why?" she asked, unable to mask her surprise. Lady Eris's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It is not my place to question His Majesty's commands, merely to ensure they are carried out." She gestured to the hallway where 2 guards waited. "Come. He does not like to be kept waiting." The journey to the West Wing felt endless, each corridor grander than the last until they reached a set of massive double doors, carved with intricate wolf motifs. The guards positioned outside stepped aside without question, clearly expecting her. Without another word, Lady Eris departed, leaving Auren alone before the imposing entrance. She hesitated only briefly before pushing open one heavy door, her heart thundering in her chest. The chamber beyond took her breath away, not for its opulence, though it certainly had that, but for its unexpected warmth. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, casting golden light across comfortable furnishings. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled not with ornamental tomes, but well-worn volumes that showed signs of frequent use. And there, silhouetted against the dancing flames, stood King Thorne. The firelight caught the silver streaks in his raven hair, highlighting the strong lines of his profile. He didn't turn at her entrance, though she knew he'd scented her the moment the door opened. As the silence stretched between them, Auren gathered her courage. "You summoned me, Your Majesty?" When he finally turned, the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. Gone was the cool, controlled monarch, replaced by a man visibly wrestling with inner demons. He'd abandoned his formal attire for a simple black tunic that emphasized the powerful breadth of his shoulders. "The full prophecy has been revealed," he said without preamble, his voice rough as if he hadn't used it in days. "It speaks of you, of us." Her fingers tightened around the silver charm still clutched in her palm. "Tell me." He recited the seer's words verbatim, each one falling between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that changed everything. When he finished, Auren stood perfectly still, absorbing the implications. "So I'm either your salvation or your destruction," she whispered, understanding dawning. "That's why you've been avoiding me." Thorne moved then, crossing the space between them with predatory grace. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough that his scent, winter pine and smoke, power and restraint, enveloped her completely. "I've been avoiding you because every moment in your presence makes me want what I cannot have," he admitted, the words seemingly torn from somewhere deep and private. A king cannot choose personal desire over duty to his realm. In the echo of his voice, Auren heard the conflict raging within him. Duty versus desire, fear versus hope. "And what does the Alpha want?" she asked softly. "Not the king, but the wolf?" His eyes darkened, pupils expanding until only a thin ring of silver remained. "Everything," he growled, the word resonating with primal hunger. "He wants everything." The space between them burned with unspoken truths, with the possibility of what could be if circumstances were different, if fate hadn't positioned them as potential adversaries. "And what do you want, Auren Vale?" he asked, her name a caress on his lips. "Freedom? Revenge for your parents? The downfall of my crown as prophecy suggests?" Her chest ached with emotions too complex to name. "I wanted freedom once," she admitted. "Now I'm not certain what freedom would mean without—" She stopped herself, unwilling to voice the dangerous truth. Thorne moved closer still, until barely a breath separated them. "Without what?" he pressed, one hand rising to hover near her cheek, not quite touching. Her world tilted as she gazed up at him, at this complicated man who'd spared her life, protected her, and then pushed her away out of what she now understood was fear, not of her, but of the feelings she evoked. "Without you," she finally whispered, the admission breaking something open inside her. "And it terrifies me, because I was never meant to love someone like you." His hand finally made contact, fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw with surprising gentleness. "That's why it terrifies me, too." The moment their eyes locked, something ancient and powerful surged between them, the bond they'd both been fighting, strengthening despite their resistance. Auren felt it like golden threads weaving around her heart, binding her to this broken, beautiful alpha who stood at a moral crossroads because of her. Without thinking, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The contact was electric, a spark igniting a flame that had been building since that first moment on the execution platform. For one heartbeat, Thorne remained frozen, and then with a groan that sounded like surrender, his arms enfolded her, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. The kiss deepened, transformed from gentle exploration to hungry claiming as his wolf surged forward, demanding what the man had denied for too long. Auren melted into him, her own wolf preening beneath the alpha's attention, reveling in the rightness of their connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Thorne rested his forehead against hers. "This changes nothing," he said, though his actions belied his words. "The prophecy can be interpreted 1,000 ways," she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Perhaps my undoing of your crown means something else entirely. The undoing of your isolation, your fear, your belief that power must come at the cost of love. He pulled back slightly, studying her face with wonder. You still believe in such things? After all you've suffered? Her hand rose to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I believe that fate brought us together for a reason, she said softly. And I don't think that reason was destruction. That night, though propriety should have demanded her return to the East Wing, Auren remained in Thorne's chambers, not in his bed, but nearby, on a chaise before the fire. They talked until dawn approached, sharing histories, philosophies, hopes long abandoned and perhaps now cautiously rekindled. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Thorne carried her to his massive bed, tucking the furs around her with careful hands. Instead of joining her, he stretched out beside the bed on the floor, close enough to touch but maintaining the last fragile boundary between them. Why? She murmured sleepily, reaching for his hand. His fingers interlaced with hers, thumb tracing gentle circles on her wrist. Because when I finally claim you completely, Auren Vale, he rumbled, voice deep with promise, it will not be with prophecies hanging over us, or fate forcing our hands. In the soft glow of dying embers, they slept beside each other without touching save for their joined hands, a king on the floor, an Omega in his bed, and between them, a bond growing stronger with each shared breath, regardless of the prophecy's ominous warning. The silver dagger plunged into King Thorne's table, quivering between his spread fingers, missing his hand by a whisper. The council chamber erupted in gasps as Lord Darien, the king's own brother, leaned forward, his silver eyes, so like Thorne's yet colder, gleaming with barely contained rage. You've shared your bed with the enemy, he hissed, voice pitched low for his brother alone. Your weakness for this Omega will be our downfall. Thorne didn't flinch, didn't even glance at the blade embedded in ancient wood. His gaze remained steady on his younger brother, his expression betraying nothing of the fury roiling beneath. The Alpha King had faced assassination attempts, rebellions, and betrayals, but never from his own blood. You presume much, brother, Thorne replied, each word carrying deadly warning. The Moonborn has not been in my bed, and even if she were, a king's personal matters remain his own. Around them, council members shifted uncomfortably, gazes averted from the royal confrontation. 2 weeks had passed since the night of revelations in the West Wing, 2 weeks of Auren moving freely through the palace at Thorne's side, her copper hair aflame against the winter grays of the capital. Rumors had spread like wildfire, of tender glances between king and captive, of private meals shared in royal chambers, of an Omega wearing the king's personal insignia upon her cloak. Darien's lip curled in disgust. Your father would be ashamed. He executed her parents to protect our bloodline from the prophecy, and now you welcome their offspring into your inner circle. He straightened, addressing the full council. I have proof of treason. With that explosive declaration, the chamber doors swung open. Guards marched in, escorting a trembling servant girl who clutched a leather satchel to her chest. At Darien's nod, she approached the table, emptying the contents before the assembled council. Letters spilled across polished wood, dozens of them, sealed with wax bearing the mark of rebel forces from the Northern Territories. And there, unmistakable despite its apparent age, lay a scrap of parchment bearing Auren's elegant script. Thorne's expression remained carved from stone as Darien lifted one of the letters. Found hidden in the Moonborn's chambers, he announced. Correspondence with rebel forces planning to infiltrate the winter solstice celebration. She has been conspiring against the crown since her arrival. The council erupted in overlapping voices, demands for immediate execution, calls for public trial, urgent pleas to secure the palace. Through it all, Thorne remained silent, his gaze fixed on the letter in his brother's hand. Meanwhile, in the royal gardens, Auren knelt among dormant herbs, fingers working the cold earth as she planted winter seedlings. Despite the chill, warmth bloomed in her chest at the memory of that morning, Thorne's sleepy smile as they'd shared breakfast, the brush of his fingers against hers as he'd departed for council meetings, the promise in his eyes that spoke of a future she'd never dared imagine. After that night in his chambers, something had shifted between them. The wall of distrust had crumbled to reveal tentative hope. Though they had not repeated that soul-shattering kiss, every glance, every accidental touch, every shared moment of comfortable silence built something precious and fragile between them. Without warning, shadows fell across her work. Auren looked up to find herself surrounded by royal guards, their expressions grim. "The king commands your presence," the captain stated, his tone making it clear this was no friendly summons. Her heart stuttered painfully in her chest as rough hands seized her arms, hauling her to her feet. "What's happened?" she asked, soil still clinging to her fingertips. No answer came as they marched her through corridors where servants and nobles alike stopped to stare, whispers following in their wake. The warmth of moments before evaporated, replaced by creeping dread. The sacred chamber of judgment lay deep beneath the palace, a circular room of black marble with a raised dais at its center. Ancient law demanded that accusations of highest treason be heard in this hallowed space, where the ceremonial waters of truth bubbled up from an artesian well at the room's heart. As the guards escorted her inside, Auren's blood ran cold. The full council had assembled, seated in tiered rows that surrounded the central dais like predators circling prey. At the highest point sat Thorne, his expression utterly unreadable, his posture rigid upon the judgment throne. Next to him stood Lord Darien, satisfaction gleaming in eyes so similar to his brother's, yet lacking the depth, the troubled conscience that had gradually revealed itself in Thorne's gaze. "Auren Vale," Darien's voice echoed in the chamber. "You stand accused of high treason against the crown. Letters found in your possession reveal conspiracy with rebel forces to assassinate the royal family during the winter solstice celebration." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet as guards pushed her forward onto the dais. From there, Auren could see the evidence, letters arranged on a table including one that appeared to bear her handwriting. A clever forgery, yet who would believe her denial over such physical proof? Her gaze sought Thorne's, searching for any sign of the man who'd held her hand through the night, who'd shared his deepest fears and whispered confidences. But his silver eyes revealed nothing, his silence a wound deeper than any physical blow. "What say you to these charges?" Darien demanded. Auren lifted her chin, refusing to cower despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I am innocent," she stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I have written no letters to rebels or anyone else. I have plotted no assassination." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council. Darien's lip curled in contempt. "The evidence speaks for itself. Your Majesty," he turned to Thorne, "the law is clear on the punishment for such betrayal." As the silence roared around them, every eye turned to the Alpha King. The ancient laws of the High Realms gave him only two choices for those convicted of treason against the crown: banishment to the frozen wastes where slow death was certain, or immediate execution. Thorne finally rose, his powerful frame casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice revealing nothing of the turmoil Auren knew must rage within him. "All of you." "Your Majesty," High Elder Mathen protested, "protocol demands." "Leave," Thorne roared, his alpha power surging through the word. The council members scrambled to obey, even Darien retreating with obvious reluctance. When the massive doors sealed shut behind them, Thorne descended from his elevated position, each step measured and deliberate. Auren remained frozen on the dais, hope and dread battling within her chest as he approached. "Why?" she whispered when he stood before her, close enough to touch yet separated by an invisible chasm. "Why this charade? If you wish to be rid of me, you needed only to say so." His expression finally cracked, revealing a glimpse of anguish beneath the royal mask. "You believe I orchestrated this?" Her chest ached with confusion. "The guards, the formal accusations, your silence when they called me traitor. What else should I believe? I received intelligence this morning, he said, voice pitched low though they were alone. Darien has been conspiring with rebel sympathizers, not to overthrow the crown but to eliminate you. The letters are forgeries, designed to force my hand. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by fresh fear. Then why this spectacle? Why allow him to accuse me publicly? Thorne's hand rose, hovering near her cheek without touching, as if he feared she would shatter. To protect you. Had I dismissed the accusations outright, he would have found more direct means to eliminate the threat you pose to his ambitions. Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. You never loved me. You loved control. But I was never yours to command. The words struck like physical blows. Thorne flinched, genuine pain flashing across his features. Is that what you believe? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. After everything? With a single glance that held all the hurt and betrayal she felt, Auren lifted her chin. What should I believe when you stand silent while they condemn me? When you let them drag me here in chains? Something shifted in Thorne's expression then, determination replacing uncertainty. Your fate will be decided shortly before the full council as law demands, he said, his voice returning to its authoritative timbre. I cannot appear to favor you, or Darien will know his ploy has failed. So I am to be sacrificed for political expedience? Auren asked, bitterness seeping into her tone. Thorne moved closer, his scent, winter pine and smoke, enveloping her. Trust me, he whispered, the words meant for her alone. As I should have trusted you from the beginning. Before she could respond, the chamber doors swung open. The council filed back in, Darien at their head, triumph already gleaming in his cold eyes. Your judgment, Your Majesty? He prompted, clearly expecting his brother to follow the ancient laws that demanded blood for treason. Thorne ascended to the judgment throne once more, his expression unreadable as the council watched with bated breath. Auren stood alone on the dais, suddenly aware that whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the future of the entire realm. The punishment for treason is clear, Thorne began, his voice echoing through the sacred chamber. A collective intake of breath followed his words as counselors leaned forward in anticipation. Darien smiled, a cruel twist of lips so similar yet so different from his brother's. Banishment or death, Thorne continued. Those are the choices our laws provide. The tension in the chamber thickened to an almost unbearable degree as he paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled council before landing on Auren. In that moment, something passed between them. A promise, a question, an offering. But I reject them both. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Darien stepped forward, outrage contorting his features. You cannot simply ignore our most sacred laws. She is a traitor, a Moonborn. Her very existence threatens everything. Thorne rose to his full height, power radiating from him in palpable waves. I am the law, he stated, each word precise and deadly. And I will not condemn an innocent woman based on clearly forged evidence. With that declaration, he descended the dais steps once more. But instead of approaching Auren, he moved to the evidence table, lifting one of the letters. This parchment, he observed casually, bears the watermark of the royal scriptorium, paper that only royal family members have access to. The implication hung in the air like a drawn blade. Darien's face drained of color as murmurs rippled through the council. At the same time, Thorne crossed to Auren, standing before her on the judgment dais. What happened next would be spoken of in whispers and songs for generations to come. The Alpha King, heir to the oldest bloodline in the High Realms, dropped to one knee before the accused Omega. If she is to be judged for treason, Thorne declared, his voice ringing with certainty, then let the crown burn. She is mine. As fire bloomed beneath her skin at his declaration, Auren watched in stunned silence as Thorne removed his silver crown, placing it at her feet in the ultimate gesture of submission and protection. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber as the unthinkable happened. An Alpha King kneeling before an Omega, choosing her over his own crown. In that moment, everything changed. The prophecy's words echoed in Auren's mind. The Moonborn shall awaken the king's bond, or be his undoing. Perhaps both were true. She had undone not his kingdom, but the walls around his heart. When Thorne rose, taking her hand in his, the mate bond surged between them, visible now as golden threads weaving around their joined fingers. The council watched in stunned silence as centuries of prejudice and protocol crumbled before the power of something far older than any royal bloodline, the sacred bond between true mates. Choose now. Thorne addressed his council, his brother, his kingdom. Accept her as mine, or find yourselves a new king. Blood dripped from Thorne's mouth as he pinned his brother against the ancient oak, his forearm crushing Darian's windpipe with barely restrained fury. The private chamber behind the judgment hall vibrated with the Alpha King's rage, the very air crackling with power as the two royal wolves locked in deadly confrontation. You would sacrifice the entire kingdom for your ambition? Thorne growled, his voice barely human, as his wolf pushed to the surface. Forge evidence against an innocent woman? Betray your own blood? Darian's eyes bulged, his fingers clawing uselessly at his brother's arm. The council members who had followed them stood frozen in shock, none daring to intervene between the royal siblings. She will destroy you, Darian choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips where Thorne's first blow had landed moments earlier. The prophecy is not yours to interpret, Thorne snarled, pressing harder before abruptly releasing his grip. Darian slid to the floor, gasping for breath as his brother loomed over him. You are hereby stripped of all titles and banished from the high realms. Be grateful I don't take your head. The Alpha King turned to the stunned council, his silver eyes glowing with lupine intensity. Any who stand with him share his fate. His gaze swept the assembled nobles, challenging each to object. None did. As the royal guards dragged the disgraced prince away, Thorne's shoulders sagged imperceptibly, the weight of betrayal heavy upon them. Only hours earlier, he had defied centuries of tradition by choosing an Omega over his crown, kneeling before Auren in the sacred judgment chamber. The moment their eyes locked across the ancient hall, all pretense had fallen away. In that single heartbeat, Thorne had made his choice, not just for himself, but for the future of his realm. If tradition demanded he sacrifice an innocent woman, sacrifice her, then tradition would burn. With a curt nod to the remaining counselors, Thorne strode from the room, his mind focused on only one thing: finding Auren. In the chaos following his declaration, she had been escorted back to her chambers by his most trusted guards, away from prying eyes and lingering threats. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Auren paced the perimeter of her rooms like a caged animal, her wolf pushing against her skin with restless energy. The events in the judgment chamber played in an endless loop. The accusations, the betrayal she'd briefly believed real, and then the unthinkable moment when the most feared alpha in the realm had knelt before her. Without warning, her doors burst open. Thorne filled the frame, his massive presence somehow larger than physical boundaries could contain. Blood still stained his knuckles, a crimson splatter marked his white tunic, yet his eyes held only concern as they found hers. For a moment, neither spoke. The space between them charged with everything left unsaid through weeks of denial and desire. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, they moved simultaneously, meeting in the center of the room. Thorne's hands cradled her face with surprising gentleness for one capable of such violence. You're safe, he murmured, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Darian is banished. The council has accepted my decision. Her palms rested against his chest, feeling the thunderous beat of his heart beneath fine fabric. And what decision is that exactly? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. You knelt before me, gave up your crown. Not gave up, he corrected softly. Offered. There's a difference. The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility. Since the first day on the execution platform, their paths had twisted together against all odds, against prophecy and politics and the weight of their histories. Why? Auren asked, the question that had haunted her since the beginning. Why would you risk everything for me? Instead of answering immediately, Thorne took her hand, his expression more solemn than she had ever seen it. There's something I need to show you, he said, something you deserve to see. Without further explanation, he led her through deserted corridors and hidden passages until they emerged outside, where two horses waited in the fading afternoon light. The winter air bit at Auren's cheeks as Thorne helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They rode in silence through the snow-covered capital, citizens stopping to stare as their Alpha King and the copper-haired woman passed. Rumors had already spread like wildfire through the city, of council chambers in chaos, of a Moonborn who had bewitched the king, of prophecies and betrayals, and unprecedented change. As the city fell behind them, they entered the ancient forest that bordered the high realms. Massive pines towered overhead, branches heavy with snow, creating a cathedral of white and green. After an hour's ride, the trees began to thin, revealing what appeared to be ruins in a small clearing ahead. Auren's breath caught in her throat as they approached. Even destroyed by time and violence, the structure was unmistakable, a temple of white marble and silver, its pillars etched with the same celestial symbols she had seen in the hidden palace chamber. The Moonborn Temple, she whispered, sliding from her horse in a daze. Her boots crunched in the snow as she approached the ruins, something ancient in her blood, recognizing this place as home. Thorne dismounted behind her, remaining at the periphery as she explored the crumbling sanctuary that had once housed her ancestors. In the center of the main chamber, a circular pool lay frozen, its surface reflecting the emerging stars of early evening. My father ordered this place destroyed when he executed your parents, Thorne said quietly, his deep voice carrying in the still air. He believed eliminating the Moonborn bloodline would save our kingdom from prophecy. Auren turned to him, snowflakes catching in her copper hair like tiny diamonds. But you brought me here. Why? As the wind shifted through the ruined columns, Thorne approached slowly, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. Because I need you to understand who I was, and who I'm trying to become. With every step he took toward her, something inside Auren cracked open wider. This powerful alpha who had spent his life believing in nothing but strength and control now stood before her with his soul exposed. I loved you before the bond, she confessed, the words escaping before she could reconsider. You just never saw me. Confusion flickered across his features. Before? In the lower city, she explained, snow crunching beneath her boots as she moved closer to him. I healed a royal guard once when you came to inspect the district. You stopped a merchant from beating his child in the square. You didn't know anyone was watching, but I saw you. Not the feared Alpha King, but a man who couldn't stand by while an innocent suffered. Recognition dawned in his silver eyes. The apothecary shop, he murmured. 3 summers ago. Auren nodded, surprised he remembered it all. I saw the man you hide beneath the crown. That's who I fell in love with, long before fate decided to intervene. The space between them narrowed to nothing as Thorne closed the final distance, his hands finding her waist as if they belonged there. I've made so many mistakes, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I let others die to protect myself. I executed innocence to maintain control. I nearly lost you to preserve a crown that means nothing without someone to share it with. Her hands came up to frame his face, thumbs tracing the sharp lines of his cheekbones. Then don't lose me now, she whispered. In the stillness of the ancient temple, with stars emerging overhead and moonlight beginning to filter through broken columns, Thorne dropped to one knee before her for the second time that day, not in political defiance, but in loving surrender. I won't lose you, he vowed, taking her hands in his. Not again. Auren's heart stuttered as confusion filtered through her joy. Again? A sad smile touched his lips as he rose to his feet once more. There was a girl in the lower city whose face I couldn't forget. A healer with copper hair who looked at me without fear. I sought her out months later, only to find her shop abandoned, her neighbors claiming she'd fled in the night. Understanding dawned like the rising moon above them. "The king's men came for my parents that night," she whispered. "I escaped only by chance." "And I believed you lost," Thorne continued, his hands tightening around hers, "until a condemned prisoner stood before me on an execution platform, and something in me recognized what I'd been searching for all along." The revelation settled between them. That fate had bound their paths long before the execution day. That perhaps the prophecy had always intended to bring them together, rather than tear them apart. As the sky darkened to indigo above the ruined temple, Thorne unwound a silver chain from his wrist, one Auren had never seen him wear before. From it dangled a pendant of moonstone set in ancient silver, identical to the one her mother had worn until the day of her execution. "This was your mother's," he said quietly, offering it to her. "I retrieved it after they were gone. I never knew why I kept it, only that something told me I must." Tears welled in Auren's eyes as she accepted the precious heirloom, the last tangible connection to her lost family. "Thank you," she whispered, emotion thickening her voice. Gently, Thorne took the pendant from her trembling fingers, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. As the moonstone settled against her skin, his hands rested on her shoulders, his breath warm against her ear. "Mark me," he said suddenly, the words so unexpected that Auren turned in his arms, sure she had misheard. But his expression held no uncertainty, only absolute conviction. In wolf culture, marking was sacred, a permanent bond between mates, initiated by either partner but traditionally by the alpha. For Thorne to ask her to mark him first was unprecedented, a complete inversion of power dynamics that had existed for centuries. "You would let an Omega mark you first?" she asked, searching his face for any hesitation. His answer came without words as he tilted his head, exposing the vulnerable junction where neck met shoulder, the sacred spot where a mating mark would be placed. The gesture of submission from the most dominant alpha in the realm left Auren breathless. "Not as Alpha and Omega," he murmured, his voice deepening as his wolf pushed forward, "but as equals." Under the weight of his stare, Auren's wolf surged in response, her canines lengthening as ancient instinct took over. Without further hesitation, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his warm skin before allowing her teeth to sink into the junction of his neck and shoulder. The moment their blood mingled, the mate bond exploded between them in a rush of gold and silver light, visible even to human eyes in the darkness of the ruined temple. Thorne growled, the sound rumbling through his chest as his arms tightened around her. When Auren pulled back, breathing heavily, she tilted her own head in silent invitation. With exquisite care, Thorne lowered his mouth to the same spot on her neck, his teeth breaking skin as he completed the sacred exchange. The mate bond solidified, burning gold between them as their wolves recognized each other on the most primal level. In that moment, prophecy fulfilled itself. The Moonborn had indeed awakened the king's bond, not to destruction, but to salvation. As the first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall through the broken roof of the temple, Thorne pressed his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cold air. "Mine," he murmured, the word transformed from possession to partnership. Auren smiled, her fingers tracing the fresh mark on his neck. "And yours," she replied, completing the ancient vow that would bind them through this life and beyond. Lightning split the sky as the ancient crown shattered against marble floors, its silver fragments scattering like fallen stars across the throne room. The assembled court gasped in unison as King Thorne stood over the broken symbol of centuries of alpha rule, his expression not of regret, but of absolute certainty. At his side, Auren Vale, no longer prisoner or supplicant but equal, watched with steady eyes as her mate dismantled tradition with his own hands. The old ways end today, Thorne declared, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. No more execution pits. No more subjugation of Omegas. No more rule by bloodline alone. A murmur rippled through the crowd, part fear, part wonder, part uncertainty. 3 months had passed since the mate-marking ceremony at the Moonborn temple, 3 months of whispered revolution sweeping through the high realms like wildfire. The return of the Alpha King with his Omega mate had sent shockwaves through a society built on rigid hierarchy and ancient prejudice. As the wind shifted through the open balcony doors, bringing with it the scent of approaching spring, Thorne extended his hand toward Auren. Her fingers interlaced with his, their mate bond pulsing visibly between them in threads of gold and silver that none could deny. "Behold your queen," he announced, not asking permission, but stating fact. "Not by my decree, but by her own right as last of the Moonborn line and first of a new era." With those words, he guided her forward to the raised dais where a second throne now stood beside his own, not smaller or lower as tradition would have dictated, but identical in height and craftsmanship. The only difference lay in its embellishments. Where his featured the wolf of the Veyrac line, hers was adorned with the celestial symbols of her Moonborn heritage. After that bold declaration, the transformation of the high realms began in earnest. The mate-bonded rulers worked tirelessly, dismantling oppressive systems that had stood for generations. The execution pits where countless innocents had died were filled and transformed into healing gardens under Auren's direction. The dungeons beneath the palace were open to sunlight, redesigned as schools where Omegas could study alongside Alphas. More importantly, they rewrote the mate laws that had allowed Alphas to claim Omegas without consent. "A true bond cannot be forced," Auren declared in her first official proclamation as queen. "It must be given freely or not at all." The council, reconstructed with representatives from all wolf classifications rather than solely alpha bloodlines, initially resisted these radical changes. Yet each objection crumbled in the face of the undeniable power that radiated from the royal pair. Not just the traditional dominance of an alpha king, but the balanced harmony of alpha and omega, working in perfect synchrony. On a crisp morning 6 months into their rule, Auren stood on their private balcony, watching the capital city awaken below. Merchants set up stalls in the marketplace, children raced through streets without fear, and Omegas walked openly without protective escorts, small freedoms that would have been unthinkable under the old regime. Without thinking, her hand drifted to her abdomen, a smile touching her lips as she felt the tiny flutter beneath her palm. Their child, conceived during the Blood Moon Festival, grew stronger each day, a perfect blending of Veyrac and Moonborn lineages that would cement the new order they were building. With every heartbeat, Auren sensed her mate's approach before he appeared. The bond between them had deepened beyond even what ancient texts described, allowing them to feel each other's emotions, to know each other's thoughts with uncanny precision. Thorne's arms encircled her from behind, his large hands covering hers where they rested on her slightly rounded belly. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured, lips brushing the shell of her ear. Auren leaned back against his solid warmth, marveling still at how completely this fierce alpha had surrendered to their bond. The man who once trusted no one now shared his every thought, his every fear, his every hope with her without hesitation. "The delegation from the Southern Territories arrives today," she reminded him, though she knew he hadn't forgotten. Their diplomatic efforts had gradually expanded beyond the high realms, reaching out to neighboring territories with offers of alliance rather than demands of subjugation. Thorne's chest rumbled with something between amusement and resignation. They come to see the miracle for themselves, the ruthless Alpha King tamed by an Omega Queen. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, painting the capital in gold, Auren turned in his arms to face him. "Is that how you see it?" she asked, fingers tracing the mate mark on his neck that he wore openly, without shame. "Being tamed?" His eyes, once cold as winter ice, now warm as silver moonlight, softened as they met hers. "Transformed," he corrected, one hand rising to cup her cheek. "Saved." The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that the execution meant to end her life had instead begun his. The man who had ordered her death had found his salvation in her survival. That night, at the formal reception for the Southern delegation, whispers followed the royal couple as they moved through the great hall. The visiting dignitaries watched with barely concealed fascination as alpha nobles bowed to an Omega queen, as servants approached without fear, as Thorne himself deferred to Auren's judgment on matters of state. "They still fear me," Thorne observed quietly as they shared a rare moment alone between diplomatic conversations. Auren smiled, reaching up to straighten the silver circlet that had replaced his traditional crown. "Good," she replied with mischief dancing in her eyes. "Because I don't, and I'm the one who owns your heart." His laugh, a sound once so rare it startled the court the first time they heard it, rumbled warm and deep. The transformation in their king both unsettled and fascinated his subjects. Where once stood a cold, calculating ruler, now stood a still formidable alpha, who nonetheless smiled at his mate's teasing and consulted her before making decisions. In the center of the hall, musicians struck up a ceremonial melody, signaling the beginning of the moonrise dance, an ancient tradition resurrected from Moonborn customs at Auren's request. Couples began to gather, but all eyes turned to the royal pair as Thorne led Auren to the center of the floor. As they moved together in the intricate patterns of the ritual dance, their bond pulsed visibly between them, golden light illuminating them from within. The watching crowd murmured in awe at this tangible proof of true mates, a bond not forced by alpha command but forged through choice and devotion. "They worship you," Thorne observed as he guided her through a turn, his hand warm against the small of her back. Not as their queen, but as their liberator. Auren followed his lead effortlessly, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, as if they had danced together for lifetimes. "They needed to see that strength comes in many forms," she replied. "That an Omega can lead as effectively as an Alpha. That balance creates greater power than domination." Between one breath and the next, the music shifted to a more intimate melody. Thorne drew her closer, their movements slowing as the other dancers gave them space, recognizing the private moment unfolding within the public celebration. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, for her ears alone. "Binding yourself to the man who once ordered your execution?" Her hands tightened on his shoulders, eyes holding his with unwavering certainty. "I bound myself to the man who knelt before me in the judgment chamber," she corrected, "who marked me as his equal in the ruins of my ancestors' temple, who shatters crowns and traditions to build something better." Her smile softened. "That man bears little resemblance to the one who sat on the execution platform." The air thickened with emotion as Thorne's forehead came to rest against hers, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "You unmade me," he whispered. The confession meant for no one but her. "And rebuilt me into something I never thought possible." As the music reached its crescendo, Thorne guided them toward the great balcony doors, which servants hurried to open as they approached. Outside, the full moon had risen, bathing the capital in silver light that seemed to call to something ancient in Auren's blood. The court followed at a respectful distance as the royal couple stood at the balcony's edge, facing their realm together. Below, citizens had gathered in the palace square for the Moonrise Festival, their upturned faces illuminated by countless floating lanterns. With a nod from Thorne, Auren stepped forward, raising her hands toward the moon in the traditional Moonborn blessing. Golden light flowed from her fingertips, connecting with the silver moonlight in an ancient magic that had been forbidden for generations. The crowd below gasped in wonder as the sky itself seemed to respond, aurora-like curtains of gold and silver dancing above the capital. As she completed the blessing, Thorne moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. To the watching crowd, they presented a unified front, Alpha and Omega, strength and compassion, power and wisdom in perfect balance. Yet only Auren felt the slight tremble in his fingers, heard his whispered words meant solely for her. "I love you beyond reason, beyond prophecy, beyond fate itself." Her wolf preened beneath the declaration, still thrilled by this fierce alpha's devotion after months of partnership. "And you," she murmured back, "until the last star falls." As darkness settled fully over the high realms, Thorne and Auren slipped away from the continuing celebrations, retreating to their private chambers where royal masks could be set aside. There, with no eyes to witness, the Alpha King pressed reverent kisses to every inch of his mate's skin, lingering over the gentle curve where their child grew. "Our ancestors would be horrified," he observed with wry amusement as he cradled her in the aftermath of their lovemaking. An Alpha serving his Omega rather than commanding her. Auren's laugh vibrated against his chest where her head rested. "Yet here we are, stronger for breaking their rules." As the fire burned low in their hearth, casting golden shadows across their entwined forms, Thorne's expression grew contemplative. "The prophecy fulfilled itself, though not as anyone expected. You were indeed my undoing." "And your salvation," she completed, fingers tracing idle patterns across his skin. "As you were mine." Under the full moon's light streaming through their windows, they kissed once more, not as king and queen, not as Alpha and Omega, but simply as two wolves who had found in each other the other half of their souls. Their wolves howled silently within them, not for war or dominance, but for the forever they had forged together against all odds. And in that moment, as their mate bond pulsed gold and silver between them, Auren and Thorne knew with absolute certainty that their story, begun in blood and death sentences on an execution platform, would echo through the high realms long after they were gone, a testament to the power of choice over fate, of love over tradition, of equals bound by something far stronger than crowns or prophecies. Their wolves had found home in each other, and nothing, not bloodlines or politics or ancient prejudices, would ever tear them apart again.